Sorry.
Someone telling me my voice wasn't loud enough. Nobody's said that very often. Yeah, so I mean, I think research is very interested in the kind of nuances. Whereas the decision-making process in health services often we need to do this or we need to do that. It's binary. That's common to a lot. It's not just common to health. It's not just specific to health services. It's specific to many different application areas. I think it's something that ought to be talked about more. Is this difference between the 50 shades of grey that we like to talk about and the need for a positive, often binary decision at the base level of application. And linked to that is this one. Researchers love complexity. It gives them a meaning to write papers and talk about all the different aspects of a problem. But in the health service, very often what they need is something more simple, something more straightforward that they can persuade people of and implement quickly and clearly. Having said that, there is a danger sometimes we might make things too simple. So there's a quote from Einstein: everything should be kept as simple as possible, but made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So there is a danger something oversimplify, and that can be a bad thing. But I think generally speaking, researchers tend towards the other extreme. We tend to overcomplicate. And we tend to seek for spend ages seeking for the optimal solution when something that's better and is good enough, and in practical terms is a better solution anyway, because people can actually do something. People in the research community, academic community, speak in different words, use different language than people in the health service. That's quite natural in a way, because we're dwelling with different types of issues, different types of problems. The way we approach things is different. But I mean, I've been to presentations where the health service people have just switched off because there's a lot of technical equations, for example. Things aren't explained in an accessible form. Might be appropriate for a skilled research expert audience, but certainly not appropriate to try and persuade some health service managers to adopt a certain model, for example, or to use a certain approach to look at problems. There's one that I think a lot of researchers will be very familiar. Getting hold of the data, I think, is a critical issue, and it's often one of the major hurdles we experience in the research community. And that's because there's an organisation that if you work within a health or service organisation, often much easier to get access to the important data you need for the modelling. In fact, Rich Wood, who many of us know here, who works at in Bristol Integrated Care Board, he actually chose to join the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, and become part of the NHS so that he could have access to the data rather than stay in the research community where he spent so much of his time struggling to obtain access, data sharing agreements, ethics, and all the rest of it. And many of us in research have found this to be a major problem. Again, there's issues there you might want to put on your Just One Thing forms to address that issue, and there are things that are beginning to happen in that landscape. Competing incentives. So you can see this list goes on and on. Researchers, until pretty much recently, were motivated by a completely different set of goals than were people in the health service. Health service people very often motivated, hopefully, to improve the service, to improve their performance metrics and so on, to save money sometimes, or sometimes to introduce new services and so on, to adopt new technologies. Researchers are rewarded, or have been rewarded to date, most notably for getting research into journals and so on. That's how they get promotion, is by having lots of published papers. How many health service people read journal papers in learned journals? Not many, I suspect, but some maybe. But again, that may be changing. So the incentives are very differently aligned. And then also, if you turn to the commercial community, they have another different set of incentives, largely, well, to keep profitable, I suppose, is one. Although, there's consultants that would also argue that they're very keen to improve health services as well. So, but I mean, the incentives are certainly not closely aligned between the different communities that need to commune, to need to talk to each other. Skills levels. I'll flick through these, otherwise it's going to get a bit repetitive. But I think there's a real need. The big difference in the skills levels of people within the health service and people within research and academia. We need to bridge that gap, and the various initiatives that are helping to do that at the moment. But I think that's, again, something that's changing slowly. This is something we came across over and over again within the MASHnet workshops. Very often managers just weren't aware of what could be done with operational research generally, modelling, simulation, for example, forecasting models, location analysis, all the rest of it. They just weren't aware. They didn't know what they didn't know. So a part of what MASHnet was doing was kind of sort of waking them up, opening their eyes to some of these possibilities. And it was amazing to see the response that some of the managers would give us when we showed them some of the things. But there isn't the channels by which these things can happen, or there certainly aren't well-performing, effective channels by which we can get this kind of potential to, over to people in the health service. This is something for the researchers to think about. I think very few, and again, it may be changing, and I'm very happy to be put right on some of these points, but very few operational research studies in health services grasp the nettle of looking at the economics of the proposed system changes that the model might be suggesting. Very few. Yeah, if you look at what the health service is about, a lot of it's centred around, how much is it going to cost? So if we can't address those concerns of people in the health service when we present our models, they're going to say that's all very well, but. So I think at some point researchers are going to need to think about how we integrate an account of the economics, the cost implications of the models that we produce. I say each one of these slides I could say an awful lot more about, but I'm just flicking through a whole range of different, and these were the things that came out from our consultations with all those communities that I mentioned that MASHnet engaged with. Bringing in the senior managers, getting the engagement from people who can can hold sway, can represent you on the board, for example, really important. If we can't do that, you're wasting your time, really, because it's just going to be, people aren't going to take it. You need to get enthusiastic senior managers on board. Nearing the politics, you very rarely go anywhere in the health and care services without sort of coming up against some kind of political environment of some sort, whether it's internal politics between different departments within a single organisation, or whether it's different organisations warring against each other to get a particular or whether it's a sort of at the national level, where people are arguing about the amount of money that should be spent on this, that, and the other health service. I was introduced to this very, very early on when I was doing my doctorate. I was working with a hospital in, I won't say where actually, this might be incriminating, but up in the northwest somewhere. And about 2 weeks in, I was approached by the senior ward manager for this hospital, and he told me, he said, well, I noticed, he said, the Strategic Health Authority, because that's what they were in those days, the SHAs, they're taking quite a lot of interest in the use of this sort of modelling stuff, this simulation stuff. He said, happy to pay you, but I want you to set up a simulation that shows the gynecology beds are going to run out in March. Pay you? I said, so it's not really the way it works. But that's a true story. He was just keen because he knew that these things were having influence, and he just wanted to use it as a kind of piece of ammunition to wheel into the boardroom just to make his case. But that's just an example. More latterly, when we were at PenCHORD, we had to pull out of a study because we realised if we were working for one organisation, we were effectively tilting it in their favour when they were competing with another regional organisation to procure a commission for community care. So we just felt the best thing to do, because we got rang up by the other organisation and said, well, look, what are you doing? It's not fair. You're going to give them an advantage. So we just thought the best thing to do here, because we're just going to alienate a whole trust if we're not careful here. So we just had to pull out. So there's politics in health services. It's very hard to avoid. I think we just need to be aware of it. As researchers, I don't know what the answer is to that. Maybe people will have some ideas. So, we can start to tabulate some of these things, but there are big cultural differences between the three communities I mentioned. And by the way, if anybody's worried about where's the patient in all this, the patient is the circle around the MASHnet logo, I think the patient is the ultimate beneficiary of something that works well here. So, having been involved with MASHnet for quite a few years, there was something called the National Institute of Health Research, the NIHR, well, it's now called the Applied Research Collaboration. It was called the CLARCS, I forgot what CLARCS stands for now, is it? Collaboration in Leadership in Applied Healthcare, I think it was something like that. It was originally started with the CLARCS. They were set up in 2006, 5, something like that. First round. They're still going, and then they latterly become the ARCs, the Applied Research Collaborations. But PenCHORD was set up within the Southwest ARC in 2010, established in 2010. And this was great news, especially for me, because I've been sort of banging on about the need for, more implementation, more integration between the research community and the health and care service community. Going on and on, banging the drum, but I hadn't had a chance to actually do any sort of applied research myself. But this was the opportunity now to set up a team that we can actually start doing and enacting the kind of manifesto, if you like, that I've been spouting about for the previous few years. So we set PenCHORD up. It started with 4 of us. It's now about 10 or 11 of us, I think, from memory. And that was set up with the basic aim of driving the research out of the needs of the health and care services. So we set up about 10, 11 years ago. And we've done a lot of sort of outreach. And we're not the only group in the country to do this sort of thing. Paul's sitting there, he's doing a lot of good work, and there's other centres in London, like Koru, for example, who many people are familiar with. There's Adele. I don't think Adele is here. It's based in Northern Ireland. And there's other centres now that are beginning to pick up this idea that we drive our research out of the needs of the service rather than from our own particular sort of hobbies and obsessions with particular research issues. So here's some examples. This is just a smattering off our website. And you can go to the website if you want to find out more about what we do with these things. But the key point here is that all these projects are driven from the needs of the service, not from our specific research interests. As I say, just a few of them here. So it's an important way in which we can enact, if you like, that dream of trying to bring the research closer to the needs of the service. And the other thing that I'd like to highlight is the really highly successful Health Service Modelling Associate Programme that we've introduced as part of what we do within PenCHORD, which has been incredibly successful. It's now become a national programme of teaching and learning, working within, funded by the Health Education England, working across England at the moment, and hopefully might actually get it across the whole of the UK one day. But that's teaching health service analysts, health service sort of service managers who are computer literate to learn some of these tools and techniques that they can then integrate within their organisation. And critically, the mentored part of the program is when we assist them in that learning by helping do something that's chosen by their organisation as relevant to the needs of their organisation. We actually have an HSMA alumni sitting amongst us here, Simon. So he can tell you how good it is. But it's been really highly more successful than we imagined. I think it's things like that can have a real influence in this area of sort of bringing these communities together, increasing the shared learning between them and so on. So I want to finish with a few reasons to be, well, I was going to say cheerful. I just crossed it out and put hopeful, because I think cheerful is over egging the pudding, really. I think we've got a few reasons to be hopeful, because there have been some changes, certainly in the time I've been banging on about this, was the last 20-odd years, and it takes time, believe me, that are promising. No more than that, I would say. So reason to be hopeful, part 1. I think there's a growing recognition within the health service itself health and care services themselves, of the importance of evidence-based, or evidence-informed at least, decision-making within the service. I think there's an increased recognition of the importance of analysis and modelling that's emerging. This is a quote from the current CEO of NHS England that many of you will have heard before. A good analyst can save more lives than a good anaesthetist. Quite an interesting comment if you think about it. And I think for all its a silver lining, if you like, for the COVID cloud is that it has brought to the fore the importance of things like modelling in planning health services. So I think in a funny sort of way it's done our cause some good in that it's highlighted the need and the role of modelling and analysis within the health services in planning. And finally, I just wanted to mention the Association of Professional Healthcare Analysts, which is an organisation fairly recently established and has grown very rapidly and has made enormous strides and is moving towards being a representative body, a bit like the BMA is for the doctors, for example, for health service analysts, and it's making enormous strides in a whole range of different areas. So hopefully that will have an impact again in forwarding and raising the profile of the analyst and modelling community, data science community within the NHS and health services themselves. That's the first reason to be hopeful. Second reason to be hopeful is the shift in the emphasis in the way in which research, certainly in universities, is assessed, amongst other things, in terms of the increasing emphasis, its recognition, if you like. I mean, I think the establishment of the applied research collaborations, which I mentioned earlier, which is an aspect of that, is a tangible aspect of that, if you like, in that increasing recognition is being placed on the need to bring research fully into application. Too much of it wasn't finding its way into proper application and improving services. And I think even with journals now, some of the journals are kind of insisting or encouraging evidence of implementation from the research studies that are publications. So I think that has certainly changed. And the research excellence framework, now I think it's moved from 20 to 25% of the way in which universities are assessed nationally is based on impact. I think so there is that increasing emphasis. I'm going to mention three. This is the third one. I think there is growing recognition of the usefulness of collaborative working between health service organisations and university research organisations as well. And that manifests in a whole range of different ways. So researchers in residence, relatively recent concept. I mean, it's been going for a while, but I can't remember many researchers in residence when I started researching, for example. Secondments up in both directions. Collaborative networking, things like MASHnet, for example. There's other things where NHS people have been brought together with researchers and so on. Partnership working, speaking to Siri this morning, so she mentioned what was going on in Cardiff from Anira Bevin. So that's a really important initiative where people are basically half employed. How does it work, Paul? Half employed by... So we got living examples of these things. But am I right in thinking that's over the last decade or so that's happened? When did that start? So all these things are happening in pretty much the last 20 years, haven't they? I think it's kind of evidence of this evolution towards a little bit more integration, hopefully. It
takes time, because the November 2014, but trying to come back, the other health boards, after one in Paris, it started last year, so it's taking time for other health boards to see the benefits and financing permitting.
Getting things through the bureaucratic hoops, yeah. So yeah, lots happening, and I think it is sort of indicative of this kind of general, slow but continuing trend towards increasing collaborative working. Hopefully it's anyway. So I haven't got a lot more to say, but I think if we turn to this, again, where are we? I mean, obviously, it's not as binary as one or the other, is it? We're somewhere in where we are in terms of our level of integration between services and so on. Where are we? Where would you put us on that spectrum, for example, between the Ormeopia and Oritopia? Where do we sit? I put the red blob where I think we are. But I think we're moving slightly towards the left side. Slowly, much slower than I would have liked, but it's happening. So in summary, we haven't delivered, and we're absolutely honest with ourselves, we haven't delivered on the promise of providing OR solutions to health and care services in this country. Only in vain minds. There's very little beef in the burger, if you like, in the way of putting it. I've outlined a whole host of reasons, and there's many more. That wasn't exhaustive by any means. I've outlined a whole host of reasons why it's difficult to do that as things stand. So a lot of the work of trying to increase that level of collaboration is going to be in looking at those constraints, those limitations, and seeing ways in which we could overcome them. There has been some progress. There are reasons to be hopeful. But there's a hell of a long way to go if we're going to get it working the way it would really ideally work. So that's me done. I'm happy to, I mean, people might want to disagree with some of the things I've said, but you might want to ask some questions as well. But then we're going to go into, we've got until 1:45. So we've got another 45 minutes. So we have a few minutes for questions. Maybe some queries about some of the things I've said. Then we'll set up a panel. And then we're going to have suggestion tombola, where we're going to spin the dice and invite somebody. So you've got a few minutes to write down your just one thing idea now while we're setting up the panel. But also, if there's any specific questions about what I've said, I'll be happy to field those. Thanks. Oh, I'm doing it, am I? Okay, I'm going to go Ruth first. Ruth Kaufman, sorry.
Some of the projects that PenCHORD had done that were in response to demand from the local health service, that you flashed up on a series of projects. Have they been successfully implemented, is the first question. So was the fact that they were, the drive for them came from the health service, did that make a difference to where they were implemented? And how widely have they been implemented if they were?
Yes, those are extremely good questions. I mean, we've got some really sort of flagship projects that we often talk about because they have been so successful and have been applied and implemented. The one that stands out is the work we did with stroke, for example. And I've given whole half-hour talks about that particular project, so I'm not going to do that now. But broadly speaking, we were looking at how to get people through the emergency phase of stroke care more quickly so that a greater percentage of them could receive thrombolysis, which is a clot-busting drug that has proven benefits in terms of reducing disabilities further downstream. And that was incredibly successful. And that has been more widely kind of disseminated, and other trusts have looked at the work we've done and made changes. And the other thing that's important about any of these changes and improvements is that they sustain. Because so often, something will happen for a brief period of time and then it would fall back to old habits and you'll go back to where you were. The implementation scientists will tell you about this. Creating sustainable change is so much more difficult than just getting a kind of momentary kind of blip and then it falls back to where it was. We did some really good work with bladder cancer in Cornwall, where we worked very closely with the oncologists at the Royal Cornwall Hospital Trust. And that they actually ended up driving most of the changes themselves. I think this was part of the key, is that they owned the work that we did with them, such that they could implement the changes, and that certainly stuck in terms of improve, and that's greatly improved. Reduced waiting times, brought in greater efficiencies, and so on. I think it's fair to say, some other things have been quite local and haven't been expanded more widely. I think it's hard to know, though, isn't it? Because people do look over the fence. One trust will look over there and look, they're doing that. Maybe we could benefit from something similar. So it's quite often to know exactly how influential some of the things you've been doing are. More recently, PenCHORD, I should have said this really, PenCHORD has broadened out and it's doing many more of its things are nationally based, actually, rather than regionally based. I mean, as part of the ARC, we were charged with, serving the regional health service organisations, but more recently, we've done a lot of nationally funded work, which does have wider implications. But I think more than anything, it's kind of the underlying ethos of what you're trying to do, because I think in the old days, certainly when I started, research was all about pursuing my research interest. I mean, it's a bit of a caricature, but it's like, I'm going to do this because I find it really interesting. It didn't take on board the fact that actually, there's a need out there for this research to be used, and it can make a major impact. And we've shown that with some of the things we've done in PenCHORD, for example. So I'm not sure that answers your question fully, Ruth, but I mean, we have, there are some good examples where we have made a difference, and yeah. Sally, we next.
First of all, I just would argue that whether COVID was actually good for modelling or not.
Okay.
I think that's an open question. But I think, like I said, last week or the week before, I was at the German OR Society conference, and the keynote speaker there was from the Port of Hamburg. And basically the whole talk was focused on why research in logistics and all these things that I naively thought would be implemented are not. So it was basically the same talk that you've given, but for this amazingly automated port, which you'd have thought. So I think healthcare is not quite as unique.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've heard that as well from other application areas as well. We're not unique. It's a more general issue.
Yeah, I mean, given healthcare is an evolved matter, do you think the different UK nations are dealing with this on this better or worse? Are they better integrated research? Or?
It's a hard one to. I mean, I think I was talking earlier at breakfast about what's going on in Wales. I mean, Wales is one area, and I think it benefits in a funny sort of way from being smaller, and to some extent, so I think the way they organise data and so on. I mean, Paul and co over there would be able to tell you much more about that. I'm sure they have issues as well in terms of getting hold of the data and all the rest of it. But I think I was very impressed a long time ago when we went to the ORAS conference in Cardiff. We had a talk from the guy who was organising the data there, and it seems to be so much more together than it was in England, for example. But since then, things like NHS Digital have happened and stuff, and we have all the issues with data. So I don't know, is the short answer to that question. I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, there's the other question about internationally as well. We talk about other application domains, we can talk about other countries which obviously operate under a completely different system of health delivery, but they still have these issues. I mean, it was interesting internationally how much the MASHnet thing was picked up by other countries, for example, when we started talking about it at international conferences, because they had the same issues about integration. So it's
a question about scanning the horizon for all the different people interested in health. I'm coming that this is a complete outsider, but it's the extent to which you feel you've got all the relationships with all the organisations like the CQC, Care Quality Commission, King's Fund, Health Foundation. There just seem to be so many organisations which are involved who could usefully be engaged to promulgate all the good work we do. Just wondering the extent to which that's an issue. Do you see that as an issue?
Yeah, I mean, how's it going to happen? Is there's only so much a small organisation can do. So I mean, is there a mechanism, is there a forum by which we could bring all those interested parties together, and what would they talk about and how would they coordinate? I think it's less than trivial, isn't it, to get all that to work? But I mean, it's a great thought. How do we get all these different interested bodies involved? Because I think that it also needs to happen. There needs to be this kind of collective will pushing towards it.
I think the ones I mentioned, I think the Care Quality Commission is an interesting one because they obviously have real power in terms of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I also noted from their website that they've gone through a whole strategy process to become much more real time in terms of use of data and those sorts of things. So I just wonder whether there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know enough about the Care Quality Commission to know whether they have a brief to look at sort of the use of OR and modelling within the organisations they survey and monitor. But it's an interesting one. But potentially, yeah, why not? So we've got quite a lot of questions over there.
This is more of a comment than a question. I've been working about 40 years, and I've worked in to stress that I think you're talking, you've underestimated the challenge almost, because I'm currently embedded in a health board, and one of the more successful ones in Wales, and without doubt it is the most convoluted, segmented, and difficult organisation to work in I've ever experienced. I mean, the level of politics, the level of lack of communication between different areas, the rivalry between the, it's fantastic. It's exceptional. I should write books about it, but it is.
Well, maybe you should.
It's a very broad range, and it is by far the most challenging one I've come across.
Yeah.
I include working in the third world.
Is that because it's so big, or is it because the issues it's dealing with are so diverse, or a combination of things?
I think it's about, well, I actually crossed off all the things I wrote here, because they're all about the healthcare rather than about us.
Yeah.
But it is about the size, the complexity. The complexity is what actually, a big objective. The complexity struck me in terms of, I'm currently working on a forecasting problem for them. I have met at least 7 different sets of stakeholders, and I'm still not yet got to meet the people for who I'm forecasting. And all these different sets of stakeholders come from various different parts of the organisation, and they have to sign off before I can even talk to the clinicians who I'm supposed to be doing the forecasting for.
Yeah. No, it's
the guy I'm working for tells me we're doing really well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's kind of common story, isn't it? I mean, everybody's sort of nodding and can relate to this sort of thing.
But I just want to emphasise that you talk about private sector, I've spent time in blue chips and all the rest of it. This is another level of challenge beyond that.
I don't think it's easy. It's certainly not easy. No, it's not. So we got Ruth and Ruth.
I have been amongst people in Bath for 20 years, and nearly all the people I know have resorted to going to private care. And I think this is so sad. And why have they resorted? Because you can't get to anybody in the houses, and if you do, they fob you off more or less. So, and when I wanted to contact a doctor, they'd say, sometimes you can't even get through. When you can get through, you have to wait ages and ages. And you don't speak to anybody you know. The whole thing seems to have been imploded, really. And I think unless you see it from the point of view of people at the bottom, and not the people at the top, which is what people are talking about, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
I think a good example of that is that programme on television about the ambulances. What do you see? People going to the doctors, going to the patients and telling them they've got to go into hospital. They take them into hospital and they queue for an hour and a half, and then they send back the next day.
Yeah.
What good is that? So something's got to happen that is there for people, like Iron Reverend thought all those years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to, cure the world through operational research. I think the problems. I've never known the NHS, for example, to be in such a bad way as it is now. I mean, and I've heard enough other people who work as nurses and doctors who say exactly the same thing. They've never known it as bad as it is now, and that's a whole range of reasons why that's the case, without going into detail. And I mean, OR can help. OR is not going to cure the health service. But it might do. It might be able to help in certain ways. You mentioned ambulances, for example. I mean, I know you've done some good work on ambulance times and stuff, haven't you, Paul, in the past? I mean, did that have an impact in helping?
Some impacts in Wales,
yeah.
And also working more in Indonesia.
Yeah, so, of course, yeah. So we have one more question.
Well, it's a very simple one.
I like simple.
How many people in this group walk around their local hospital to inspect it for cleanliness?
Oh, we've got a hand up over there.
When my father-in-law was in there for dementia.
I mean, the thing locally, there's two things. You can go and observe your hospital trust board meeting and put questions. You've got your name down with the trust. You invite things called place inspectors. Patient-led assessment of the clinical environment. And you go around the place and you look at particular parts of the hospital, you check for the top of the curtain round the university. You really do that, you get the best of it. The longest question on the finishing dementia say, oh, there's down patches of thought, I think, that need, you know, and a lot of the data, you've got to get some research, between the monkeys like me wandering around, who's taking a bit. But the other thing is, if you do that, you get to talk to the people in your local hospital. And they don't talk to us with a threat, because you're there to help them. And then you start getting something that they really need. One of the things about researching is that none of the people have problems, but they don't think mention that problem there. It might be actually a very crucial problem, the thing you're trying to research. Certainly in an industrial context, what I've found is you're trying to get a decent bit of production process. There's some funny fell in the corner there. The thing that really bugs me, because and then it works.
In my office at the university, the person opposite is the lead for the patient and public involvement and engagement group. I could see her glowing as you were talking, because I think there's a real role for much more patient and public involvement in helping the service. I mean, the ways in which that happens, the effective ways that can happen is an interesting point. Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done at that level. I think we've got about 25 minutes left. I think we can probably go straight into the tombola, can't we? Because we don't need to have a panel. We can go straight into the tombola session. So if you haven't written your just one thing yet, now's your opportunity, and I will set up I'll set up the random generator. How many forms did we get at? 34. Okay. It's interesting. It's this one. It's okay. Oh, we're not on it. So we can do. Hold on a minute. Let's get it up first. When I know where I am. So you reckon you distributed 34? 34 okay. Right. It should come up now. It's plugged in, isn't it? This is something to do with the screen sharing on here. Hold on a minute. Let's see what this does. Let's try plugging in again. There we go. Are we ready? Has everybody got their just one thing? That's not the first number. The first number's coming. So I'm pressing that, and then for some reason it contracts the field. So the first number is 10. Who's got number 10? The number's in the top left, top right corner of the form. Would you like to announce your idea? Then you get a choice. You get the first choice of Quality Street as well.
Right, so I wrote down better data access and integration, which I mean just data linkage.
Yeah.
Kind of more connection between the objectives and the data, how they can actually be integrated and how to deliver the framework.
And the only ideas how to attain that? How you get better data linkage? Oh, I think you can still get first choice and pass it round for the next person. So better data linkage, I think, yes. I mean, there's a lot of work being done on that, and I think it is an important area. Let's see who comes next. For some reason, it closes the window. I'm not quite sure why. Oh, I don't know why it does it, Ruth. Yeah, I should have done it with a physical device. 15. Who's got number 15?
I have received a really annoying email this morning, so I said maybe we could move from the term data owners or data custodians to something more like data facilitators. I can see you might just bump there.
So there's a change of name.
Or just, yeah, change of name and maybe cultural change from like, data owners or custodians to something like facilitators.
So this is in particular context. We're talking about...
So the headline is data access for research.
Yeah. So you're talking about somebody who's the facilitator for a operating theatre, is it?
No, sorry. So I'm talking about like the people who manage data.
I mean the data managers, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just talking about how do we move from getting easier access to the data. So my just one thing, very small, is maybe we could change the name of that role from like a data owner to maybe the word facilitator or something like that.
Or enabler or something, yeah. So a facilitator, yeah. No, I think names can be important, titles can be important because people get data owner, that's like I own it, so I'm not going to give it to you unless you pay me lots of money, for example. Well, you like to Yeah, no, thank you. I will be collecting all these forms at the end, by the way, so if we don't get a chance to actually sort of announce it to us, you pass the quality street over to, and we'll have the next number. I'm not quite sure why it's doing this to me. It was working this morning. F8. But I'm doing F9, is that not...
I thought it was F5.
So we've got number 30. We go, number 30.
Started my PhD, but so far I think that stakeholder engagement and access to real data is important to find out what is the real problem in the system.
So by stakeholder you mean?
I mean the people in the system who can monitor the challenges, like managers, or for example, in my field, supply chain managers are stakeholders that I mentioned.
So get them engaged in the process of thinking about the...
Yeah, in the development of the, in the first stages of the problem development, they could help a lot to the researcher to find out what is the real problem, not from the researcher perspective. Sometimes the objectives are different from the stakeholder.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of it comes out of getting that working together. I mean, funny enough, I'm sure others have had this experience as well. Part of the battle is just getting people together in the health service. I mean, Claire used to be involved in something called, and Ruth as well, used to be involved in something called SimLean, isn't it? Back in the day, I mean, we've done similar things, not with lean thinking and so on, but where we just got different people from different parts of a hospital trust together in the room. And it's almost like that was the biggest success story, was actually just getting them to talk about these things together in one room, because they don't often have that opportunity. So, yeah, I think that engagement's important. So the quality streets can migrate across to that table now, and we'll generate another number. So you reckon Control 8 is better? Oh, it doesn't. Oh, F8. Oh, okay. I don't know what I've done now. Let's start it. again. 12. Actually, maybe that's the way to do it, just kick it off every time. We've got another one on the same table. Can we shout out for Ruth's benefit? Thanks.
So normally I actually work together a lot with humanitarian organizations, and I notice the same struggles. So for us, what really helped was someone dedicated at the organization that got internal funding to help us. So they got dedicated time and therefore salary to help us develop the model, to think of the solution, and to see whether it would also suit the people at their organization as well. Right? And that really helps, because then they have also incentive themselves to work on it, and they also don't feel that they have to suffer in their work quality.
So it's all about getting them. Do they actually drive the shape of the work that you do to some extent, or how does that work in terms of that liaison?
So what they wanted to do is they were using some sort of optimization tool. They wanted to expand on that. So what they did is they appointed someone already familiar with the optimization, and they said, okay, you can spend time on it as well, and then discuss with me the results, see whether the output makes sense, and also think from their perspective, is the result what the other practitioners would like to see as well.
That's really important, I think, yeah. It's all about this. And the other thing to mention about that is the learning that happens almost on the side, isn't it? People are learning about each other's worlds, learning about different techniques. And, yeah.
Dedicated time, also have dedicated time to explain them the methodology.
Yeah, and they want to learn at that point because they realise why it's useful to learn. You know, it's motivated learning. So it's quite, yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff that happens on that level. Thank you. Choose a quality street, and I'll see. Should we try F8? You reckon? Okay. Oh, okay. So I need to press a button. It's not doing anything. It's usually Control 9. F9 doesn't work. I tried it earlier. Yeah. It'll be here somewhere. 7. Oh, why is this? No, this is the way to do it. Number 30. I've got another way of doing it now. Already had 30. 31. And that wasn't just, that's just random. It's not just counting up. We got number 31.
Yeah, so I would say we focus quite a lot on one thing sometimes, which is maybe profit or efficiency or something. So I would say it would be important to also focus on maybe fairness or environmental problems. And so they have some sort of a marketing focus for everything. I'm not in the field itself, so I don't really know what it is.
So we're talking about sort of equity here. Is that what you're talking about? Is it fair? You mentioned the word fairness.
Yes, also, or maybe some sort of how do you say that? Like we have private healthcare, we have a public system. So what I'm saying is that we should focus on many things, like efficiency, profit, and money, but also on people, also on
Equity, yeah.
equity.
Yeah, there's a lot of emphasis on that, to be fair, I think. I mean, Simon, you can probably say a bit about that, can't you? You're doing a lot of work on equality and equity, different things.
Equality is a really big thing at the moment. I mean, we know COVID's had a real big impact on certain demographics, so it's just really hard to understand what it means and how we can tackle that. A lot of work to be done around that.
Great, so pass the sweets over. I think we've got time for about 3 more, and then we'll maybe have a wrap up. So I think I can do it like this. I thought I could. 13. We had 13?
this for the speech. So I wrote communication, but you brought up the slide as well on lost in translation, and I think that was a really good point. So I'm working with 2 different hospitals on modeling patient flow, and one of the hospitals, the operational manager, she's super stressed. She's the busiest person I've ever met. And at the other hospital, the operational manager, also super busy, but he has taken a class in OR, so he's familiar with some simulation techniques, system dynamics, discrete event simulation. And so when I wrote communication, what I meant by communication is making sure that the modeler and the clinicians, managers are on the same page, and that goes to not just understanding the problem, but understanding the technique as well. So working with the second hospital, I feel like it's gone a lot quicker, a lot more smoothly. I've had quicker access to data, and I've understood all the different intricacies of the problem a lot better and in more detail, just because when we're talking about the problem, but also the technique, we found that we're all speaking the same language.
So how far does that rely on that single individual?
Sorry?
How much does it rely on that single individual that you were describing?
It does heavily rely on him. So I mean, so he is the person I'm working with is the cancer services manager, and so he's present at all the meetings. So he's the one I'm working with most, like one-to-one. But when we first introduced the project, I had a presentation for all the clinicians, and I tried my best to sort of explain the project and the technique to the clinicians and the radiologists and the nurses. But he was present, so he was able to translate a couple of things to them and say, oh, she means this, and this is what she's alluding to. So
it's very often the case where I've seen really successful stories of change, that it's been one sort of champion, one individual, one person with a particular interest or passion, if you like, to support these kind of things. I think a lot of the challenge we're talking about, the big challenges here is getting that culture instilled across an organisation, so all the staff, not just specific individuals, have kind of take that kind of stance, and that's never going to be easy. You want to add something on?
I could just add something in, yeah. Cheating really, but my just one thing was to appoint OR champions, because somebody who can bridge the gap or a go-between, to encourage them to nominate people.
And that can often have an amazing transformative effect on many of the other staff, so they can pick up that kind of passion, if you like, as well. So I've seen that happen. So very often individuals can be very important, but to get universal sustained change, something else needs to happen, general adoption. I think what we'll do is we'll have 2 more chosen ones, and then we'll open it up to the wider, because some people here might be really keen to share their thought, and it might relate to some of the things we've said. 8. Synchronicity. 9. And it's really great, go for it.
I'm a health economist, so I think maybe involve or include health economists on what research proposals so we can integrate both parts of research and provide healthcare with more tools to be able to implement.
So that relates to one of the slides I put up, I guess, which was about following the money, about building in the economic dimension to our models more thoroughly, so that people who are making policies can actually see that. Because have you seen that happen? Are there many examples of where you've seen that happen, where, say, a modeler or an OR person has worked together with you as a health economist?
No, not really. We do some discrete event simulation, and we try to kind of tap in a little bit on operational research and use some health economics tools to get constant quality of life in it, but we haven't really worked with OR people.
I mean, interestingly, there's a chance to say this. One of the areas where modelling really has had a big impact is in health technology assessment through National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, NICE. So I used to do economic modelling with and produce cost-effectiveness models for NICE back in the day. And that's pivotal. That's absolutely right. To the extent that some of the drugs companies that were being cold-shouldered by NICE would take out lawyers to complain about non-sharing of models and things like that. I mean, when you get, when they're spending tens of thousands of pounds to get lawyers involved in order to obtain models, that's kind of, that's kind of a sign of success in a way, isn't it? Because it's being taken very seriously. But there's not many other areas in healthcare where you can point to that kind of engagement with the modelling community. So we'll have one more and then we'll open it up because there may be people who've got fantastic ideas they'd like to share or thoughts. 33. Oh.
For mine, it was from university working with student projects, you work with who you're given access to, and at the moment that's usually the analysts. And so I like to work with clinicians, the operational staff, and then I include everybody. If the cleaners, the porters are relevant, then we like them. But when you're invited in, sometimes you aren't allowed to, well, you don't feel allowed. We should just insist on all the relevant people, because you can get to the end of the project and find that they've not told you something they didn't know.
So engagement with, and is that what, when you did the SimLin thing, the SimLin Sim or whatever it's called, because you were involved in that building simulations, did you have all those people involved, or did it tend to be specific?
Ruth set it up and got the money for it.
Yeah.
We kind of worked with, they were called, what were they called? Improvement. They were improvement teams who were keen on lean, using lean in the ideas for the industry, which was basically everybody's in this process and everybody can contribute.
Yeah.
But they set up these, I don't know what they're called, kind of big room.
Yeah.
So they had people there who knew the people, knew the staff, when they wanted to concentrate on a particular area, they invited the relevant people to that. They already had that set up, and we went in and had, from their post-its, we did a simulation model and talked them through it.
Yeah. It's a very interesting, I mean, not necessarily, the thing that impressed me about it was not so much that you might be employing lean methodologies and so on, it was the way in which you've got that engagement and that kind of almost immediately producing a simulation model that they could then, so you've got the ideas flowing about and getting the people in the same room together, which I think if we could do more of that, I think it would be really beneficial.
Flow Coaching Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you come across that?
There's something called Flowopoly, isn't there? There's something called Flowopoly, which is a kind of simulation game that gets played by.
Yeah. And they seem to be using lean ideas because they talk about their big room.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Can we hear what your answer would have been, so we know what the right answer is?
Was no one big idea. I think we've done this. We've done this exercise a few times, and it's always useful to get the kind of diversity of thoughts from people. I think that there's a lot. I mean, hopefully, there's a lot of things that I've mentioned that bear on it. I think we need to tell good stories. If I was forced into a corner and had to put something down on one of these forms, I'd tell good stories, because I think stories are what make an impact very often. It's not all the theory and stuff and the abstract and the equations. They're important because they give the robustness and the trust in the fact that it's been done properly. But at the end of the day, what influences people more than anything is telling good stories. And I think we need to do more of that. And we need to get the message out. I mean, there have been good stories. I was painting quite a pessimistic picture in that presentation. But there have been some good stories. I mean, we've got some good stories to tell in PenCHORD. I'm sure they have at Southampton. Cardiff certainly got Coru in London. I mean, there's lots of different centres working on these kind of approaches, and they've got good stories to tell, but there's not enough sharing of those good stories, because if it got out more to the managers, if the health service conferences were being told about these things, it would generate that kind of energy of adoption, which is what we need from that side as well. So that my answer would be read Impact Magazine. Has anybody got a, because I'm aware, I mean, not everybody had a chance to share their, obviously, a few of you, some of you might have some really strong ideas that you'd like to share. So first of all, you, and then at the back.
So I really wanted to write down access to real-time data to do modelling on, but actually, having been involved in the project that has built an application doing real-time prediction, we're now facing the challenge of getting it over to the hospital to adopt. And I think what I've actually written down is investment in analyst capability inside the NHS, because until you can do that, your model is always something that lives outside and can never really be owned and sort of built on and taken forward by the hospital itself. And the NHS analysts that I have met generally are never given any kind of development opportunities. So
join AFA. AFA's the cause that is really championing that kind of and the Goldacre review, and all this sort of stuff, But I think AFA's done quite a lot to raise the profile of analysts within the service. It's made, and it's only just beginning. It's making quite important strides. I think it's good stuff.
It's sort of in the same vein, I think, as you're telling good stories, in the sense that initially I wrote down, why don't we just publish in medical journals? And then I thought about it a bit more and realised that what you don't see is in any other thing, you'd be marketing this. You don't see anything like that. So my actual next article to write is 10 modelling projects that made a difference for the NHS journal in Wales or something like that, that actually just promotes it and makes it visible to people.
I think it's absolutely right. Christine?
Well, Michael Mosley has managed to create this Just One Thing series, which he's talked about 100 different things. Why don't you have a podcast, Martin, where you have...
Why don't you have a podcast, Christine?
15 minutes released every month or something with just one thing.
Just one thing to improve the health service, it's a good...
You might need to check that Michael Mosley is happy. I think you need some way of making it accessible.
Yeah. I think it's all this thing about different worlds. And we've been like this for too long, we need to be like that. That's what I have to say. But, we've got two more, and then we better finish.
Can I just go back to the first one you said, sorry, I don't know your name.
Christian.
You said that you had the real-time data, but it's getting it over to the hospital. I don't think you can do these things as an add-on afterwards. I think you would start at the beginning, conceiving, if you're doing a research project, what is the pathway to implementation, and having it managed as a whole through that pathway to implementation. Otherwise, everybody's running to keep up, and you don't know, there's no ownership through the thing, which touches on some of the things that others have said about needing somebody in there who owns and going to see it through. But if you just think of them in bits, they don't.
I think it's important, so getting people involved in the outset. We've been saying this, Paul and I wrote a paper. How long ago was that paper we wrote, Paul? 2004 we wrote this paper. We've been banging on about this. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing we've been talking about. It's like getting the managers involved from the outset, getting them engaged in the process. Sally, was there somebody else with a hand up? So we end with you, Sally. You have the final word.
So people have talked about engaging with stakeholders, but one of the problems you didn't mention was not invented here, which is where we're all taught that we should be engaging with stakeholders and finding out what their problem is. But it kind of links back to what you were saying about sort of, a model or an idea might be used in one hospital, but you try and get it used somewhere else. And we're really bad at that. And I think it is about marketing ourselves. And when we don't like doing that, but there's also this resistance to a model that you built for one place is kind of not used anywhere else because we work so closely with one group of clinicians or whoever they are that we're almost setting that barrier to then that model being more widely used. So I think we really need to think about generic models.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Really good point. As researchers, make our models generically applicable. And so we'll call it to close there. Thank you for coming, and thanks for all your comments.